phone, so leave a message at the tone, 'cause today I swear I'm not doing it.
Welcome back, everybody, to Off the Cuff. Adam Banks here with you. Amber is joining me, as she always is, via Zoom at her house. I'm at mine. We are social distancing. This is House Arrest Series, Volume 5. As promised, ladies and gentlemen, I have Dan Pauley joining me, also via Zoom. Dan, it's so nice to see you, my man. He is the host of Friends in the Corner podcast. He's been doing the show for a couple years now. And Dan and I go way back, all the way back to BCTC days. We used to work together at a community college. Remember those days, Dan?
Yeah, man. It feels like yesterday. It's been a while since we've had those times together. And I was thinking this might be one of the first times we've been together as post-BCTC employees.
Yes, it really has. It's good to see you, though, man. Like, I know it's not in person, but it's what I like about this Zoom is I can actually look at your face. It's really good to see a friendly face. Good to see a good friend.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. A friend in the corner, if you may be.
Yeah, if I may be. So, Dan, those who don't know about Friends in the Corner podcast, and if you don't know about Friends in the Corner podcast, I mean, who are you anyway? You should know about this show. It's a great show. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I've been doing the show now for almost 2 years. It's a show that is Kentucky-centric, and we talk all things Kentucky. We interview people that do awesome stuff all around the state, and then we also splice in a few other things as well that I find fun, from bourbon reviews, Kentucky sports, and all sorts of stuff. So it's just a podcast that shows my entire love obsession with the state of Kentucky. So have had a background in podcasting. I originally was a part of a UK sports podcast called BBN Chalk Talk with former UK football player Max Gabi. I started that show with him a few years ago. After that season, I left that show. Always had the idea of doing a show, and I really didn't know where I wanted to go with it until actually, Adam, I met you at BCTC, and we started talking about Off the Cuff.
Hey, let me stop you right there for just a second. I was joking a little earlier in the show, Dan. I don't know if you were listening, but I was saying that I don't know this to be a fact, but I think I played maybe a small, tiny role in you getting started with Friends in the Corner.
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
okay.
You did.
Oh, Dan, no.
When I was really getting started, when I started coming into BCTC was kind of when Adam was starting to exit out. But we talked a lot about podcasts, and I told him how I was a part of BB and Shock Talk, and then he told me about his show. And over the years until I started mine, I kept up with Off the Cuff, and it was one of the shows that inspired me to start my own, and Adam became one of my very first guests that I had on the show all those years ago.
I appreciate that too, Dan. That was a lot of fun, and you just build such a good atmosphere, a good energy, a good vibe. It truly is just a nice, comfortable place to sit down, and you built just a really good atmosphere for your guests to come in, and I think that's what you were trying to build. I know you have a lot of just eccentric people in Kentucky, a lot of interesting people you find interesting in Kentucky. So I have to ask, you've had a lot besides me, because I know I've been your favorite. Who's been your I tell you what, I don't really want to ask who's been your favorite, but really not really your favorite, but who came on and just gave the best interview?
Man, that's a great question, because I have done a lot of great interviews. I've interviewed country singers. I've interviewed hip-hop artists, YouTube content creators, pro wrestlers. As of a few weeks ago, I interviewed my first pro wrestler, Superior Tony Evans, out of Bowling Green, Kentucky. Probably the one that for me personally, I know this sounds like a cop-out answer, the one who gave the best interview, I have to believe, is my fiance, Catherine Watwood. When we got engaged last year.
Great answer. Yeah. That was such a good answer. That's a good answer.
We did a how we got together type of interview together, and she rocked it. So, yeah.
Dan, I listened to that, by the way. I did. And let me just say congratulations. I guess I'm looking for my invitation.
Well, I got some bad news for you.
Hold on for a second. I'm looking for it still, Dan. I can't find it.
Oh, I got some bad news for you because due to the COVID outbreaks, unfortunately, our wedding has been canceled. So we're still going to get married this summer. We're kind of looking on the bright side of it all, but things have unfortunately changed as most people's plans have them this season.
Yeah, I know you are one of the many people who've been affected by this, you and your fiance, but you two seem like you're so happy together. You're just rolling with the times. You're like, we still love each other. We'll get married whenever. That's kind of how I look at you two.
Yeah. And we say, hey, we got money back for a house now, I guess. So,
well, Dan, I know that you celebrated just a couple weeks ago. Was it your 100th episode or was it your 50th?
I haven't quite gotten the 50th yet, but I'm getting there.
Gosh, why do I feel like that you have done 100 episodes for?
Because it feels like it all this time I've been on here, but I'm coming up on 50, which is great because I didn't think I was going to make it past 5. So it's awesome to kind of see that the show still has momentum going, and we're still going, and we're getting amazing people that still come on the show. And Adam, I know you've been on 4 or 5 of the episodes yourself, so I'm hoping to have you on a few more.
Oh, for sure. I definitely would love to. Well, just a personal question, podcaster to podcaster. What's really been some of your biggest hurdles as a host that you have to deal with?
So I would say, and I've said this for a lot of content creators, I think is trying to budget your time to it. I talk to a lot of content creators who really get started with podcasting or YouTube videos or whatever, and they're super energized and they're super pumped for getting that show started, and then you get into 5 or 6 episodes and they're like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I think for me, it's been trying to get that momentum going and saying, hey, I got to get these shows out, even though maybe only 2 or 3 people listen to this show. It's important to me to stick to this timetable to say, I got to get each and every one of these shows out. And by doing that, you keep going. And Adam, some of the advice you gave me back in the day when I started was, if you just keep putting episodes out, you're going to get to 200 episodes. You're going to get to 300 episodes. And that's kind of some advice that stuck with me, to keep the show going, keep putting good shows out there, and hopefully keep growing from here.
I think that the biggest thing people have to remember is to just be consistent. No matter what kind of mood you're in, the show has to go on. You have to keep putting out content, and some people aren't built for that. Right. So, Dan, you fit right in just with being a regular old broadcaster. But we got lots more with Dan Pauley coming up. We're going to take a quick break, so stick with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to Off the Cuff. Adam Banks here with you. Last segment of the hour. Amber Turner is here. Also joining us is Dan Pauley from Friends in the Corner podcast. He is joining us via Zoom. He is at his house, just like Amber is at her house and I'm at mine. This is House Arrest Series, Volume 5. We've been doing this series ever since this COVID-19 broke out here in Kentucky. We've been trying to keep our distance from one another. Dan, we were talking about your podcast, and we were telling people about some of your guests. You talk about a lot on that show. You talk about bourbon reviews, which is my personal favorite. And I don't know really any other, I'm sure there are, but I don't know of many other podcasts that do that. So I think that's really cool and creative how you have included that. And if there are podcasts that do that, which I'm sure there are, they've just not promoted it. So I don't know about it. You're the only one that I know that does a bourbon review podcast. Amber, name one bourbon review podcast.
Friends in the Corner with Dan Pauley.
besides that one, can you name one?
That's the only one we need to know.
Well, my day job, I do work in bourbon. I work at a bourbon distillery, but I don't know if my show quite meets the normal day-to-day bourbon actually entails.
Well, Dan, we have a lot in common. That's why we hit it off years ago. We both are big wrestling fans, and we as wrestling fans, Amber's a big wrestling fan too. So all of us here, we just join in on the conversation. We lost a wrestling icon, Howard Finkle. He was the WWE ring announcer, and he was synonymous for all of these famous calls. I'm talking everything from Hulk Hogan to Stone Cold Steve Austin winning the WWF championship. You hear his voice. It was a big hit. Do you have any Howard Finkle memories?
You know, a lot of it's just from what I've gone back and watched. Howard Finkle was unfortunately a little bit before my time. But I mean, much like any legendary voice in wrestling, you have those that are kind of the staples. For some of us, I'm sure Jim Ross is that way too. I know for me, my childhood, when I think about my wrestling love, Jim Ross was that guy. And, but for Fink, when you go back and listen to how he would pronounce Hulk Hogan, I'm doing the worst Fink impression ever.
That wasn't bad.
Yeah, and
the following contest is scheduled for one fall. It is for the World Wrestling Federation Championship.
Yeah. Or my favorite was The Undertaker.
Or only 1 foot of Shawn Michaels touched the floor. Remember that one?
Yeah, and I would say when you go back and look at wrestling, when you look at people who've made an impact outside of the ring, Howard Finkel's one of those guys. When probably a caveat of the wrestling industry, it's really hard to do. And just through his voice, he's one of those recognizable names. You're going to constantly go back to the history tapes and you'll hear his voice on it. And so it's definitely a sad loss. I know I listened to Bruce Pritchard, some of the WrestleLift podcast the other day, and sounds like he's very torn up about it too. And I think for the wrestling industry, that's a huge loss for them. So
it is a huge loss because Finkle was the longest working employee at the WWF. He started there he was the first announcer that they hired. Think about that. And he was the first announcer that WWE officially hired when they became WWE, or when they became WWF. When Vince bought it from his father and he established Titan Sports, Howard was his first employee. That was his first announcer. So he's been the longest employee there. So he's met and touched everybody that's come through those doors all of these years. And you're right. You know, Jim Ross, of course, that would bother me too when Jim goes. When all of these guys go, it bothers me. And it's sad when all of these guys go. I'm going to be heartbroken when I lose every time I lose a wrestler, I get heartbroken. But Finkle was just one of those guys for me because of the memories, the nostalgia that he brings, the chill bumps that he would bring up and down your spine before announcing a major match in wrestling.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, I think Tommy Dreamer, wrestler, I think made a little bit of a debut in the early 2000s in WWF, actually was visiting Finkle a lot. And there was a little sign posted in the back of one of the last pictures he posted, and it was his medical notes. And it said, please turn the television to WWE Wrestling at 8 Central Time. And they're like, even when he wasn't here, he was still here. And I was like, that pretty much sums up the Finkle for me.
People have been given the Fink some love. They have taken to Twitter and to other social media pages. Vince McMahon, the CEO of the WWE, said, the grandest moments in sports entertainment history were made all the grander thanks to Howard's iconic voice. Triple H, whose first title win in WWE, which was the Intercontinental Championship in 1996, was announced by Finkle, and he said, you weren't someone until you heard Howard announce you. So I thought that was pretty big too. He died on April the 16th at the age of 69, and he had been unwell since a stroke that he apparently had back in February. So we lost the Fink. And speaking of wrestling, Dan, what do you think about them being essential? Did you hear about that?
I did. Very interesting. I'm not complaining too much because if anything, and I was talking about this on a previous podcast of my own, wrestling has helped us to give a little break from everything else going on. So more power to them that they can get that type of, I guess you could call it clearance to do that. So I'm still tuning into WWE. I'm still tuning into AEW to catch up for everything because there's not a whole lot else on to watch right now.
No. I guess being friends with the president has its perks.
Yeah, I guess so.
All right. Before we go, Dan, I have to talk to you about the Michael Jordan documentary. Michael Jordan, to me, is the GOAT. He is the greatest of all time and the greatest person ever pick up a basketball. Now, I'm not taking away anything from Kobe Bryant or LeBron James. I'm not taking away anything from those guys, but Michael Jordan was just on a different level. The aura that Michael Jordan had, that mystique, just the number 23, he was a sight to see. And he has ingrained himself into our pop culture, his brand, his image. He has. I got to ask, Dan, are you a Michael Jordan fan?
I am, from a historical standpoint. I can't tell you. I'm 29 right as of the last month, so I can't really recall too much of watching Jordan growing up. But much like Kobe, and we've talked about Kobe on my show before, Adam, you hear about the legacy and the lore of Jordan. And going back to watch the documentary, it kind of re-acknowledged that how great he actually was.
I like the fact that it touched on a couple things. One, a lot of times people like to say, oh, Michael Jordan couldn't win it without Scottie Pippen. Episode 2 really touched on that, how Jordan played a lot of the 97 season without Pippen and still was winning. So I was glad that they touched on that. I didn't realize either that Michael Jordan was injured for a short period of time. I thought he went his entire career without a major injury, but I didn't realize that his second season he was injured with his foot and they limited his minutes.
Mm-hmm. So, I thought that was kind of interesting too, to watch that. And I literally just finished watching both the first 2 episodes an hour ago, but it was interesting to see because you wanted to see how badly he wanted to play. And I mean, you hear the legendary story about how he played through the flu.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I loved more than anything watching this entire show is no matter what he did, he wanted to prove he was the best on that basketball court. He was so competitive on a level, I think, that surpassed any other player even today. He wanted to play past those 7 minutes they limited him to. He wanted to play past the flu. He wanted to solidify himself as the GOAT.
And this new generation is getting introduced to him. I think about these kids that were maybe watching that documentary the other night for the first time. They're seeing Jordan for the first time. Wonder what they thought when they see that. Because like I said, he's a sight to see. And what I mean by a sight to see is, those people that just mesmerize you when you look at them, the way Jordan would float and move as he played the game. I talked to a guy one time. He was from Chicago and he had season tickets in the 90s. And he said it was a whole nother thing watching Jordan play live. He said he was good on TV. He said, but there was nothing like watching him live. The way he would move was unlike anything he'd ever seen. So this new generation, I'm so glad that they're finally getting an intro to who Michael Jordan is.
Well, and you think because there probably has been such a gap between when Jordan finally retired and now. I mean, that's a whole generation of people who did grow up with LeBron James. And for me, since I lived through the LeBron James era, I do consider LeBron James to be the best basketball player of all time. But if I was able to see Jordan in his prime, my consideration may be different. And so, yeah, you're being reintroduced to this player. Like that's how I felt when I watched the first time the Bo Jackson documentary. I obviously didn't see Bo Jackson in his prime, but going back, you're like, who was this guy? How is he this great? And I think a lot for a new generation, they get to relive how great this guy actually was.
Yeah. Amber, what about you? Are you a Michael Jordan fan?
Well, I usually set out when you guys talk sports, but I like Michael Jordan in Space Jam.
That was a good,
yes.
That was a great movie.
Top 10 movie. Dan, you and Catherine's got to show you babies that.
The Space Jam?
Yeah.
Space Jam.
We have it on DVD ready to go.
Hey, so have you rescheduled the wedding? Is that coming like anytime? Do you know the date yet?
So what we've kind of decided is, as of now, with everything happening, what we're kind of going to be going with is in June when our wedding was supposed to be, we're going to elope. And then we're going to have a small ceremony back in my hometown of Dayton, Ohio next year. And we're just going to call it that is. We spent the last year kind of really prepping and preparing for this wedding. And it's kind of sad to see where it's gone. But we, at the end of the day, want to just do what we think is best for both of us. And it's not about the pomp and circumstance of the wedding. It's about us really tying ourselves to each other. So we're going to elope this June. We have a nice apartment lined up for ourselves in Versailles, Kentucky, and we're going to rock and roll from there.
Well, I wish you all the best. Dan, before I let you go, tell everybody where they can listen to Friends in the Corner podcast and how they can follow you on social media.
Absolutely. So we are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud. If you want to search for us there, Friends in the Corner podcast. If you want to follow us on social media, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at FITC Podcast. We also have a Patreon page for anyone that wants to support us at patreon.com/FITC Podcast. And if anyone wants to email the show, email friendsinthecorner@gmail.com. That's friends in the corner altogether lowercase at gmail.com.
Dan, always a pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Adam. And Amber, finally nice to meet you. Hopefully,
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was Dan Pauley, ladies and gentlemen, with Friends in the Corner podcast. You need to check out his podcast. It's pretty good. Amber, it's always a pleasure.
Well, I miss you.
I do too. It's been too long. I can't wait to just touch that face again.
Well,
all over. Would you be mad? Are you going to be one of those people that get mad when I touch because I'm a touchy person?
No, I'm probably going to embrace it.
I hope that more people are like that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, big special thanks to Dan Pauley for joining us. You can follow Off the Cuff on Facebook at Off the Cuff with Adam Banks, or you can follow the co-host Amber Turner on Insta or Snap at Ambu447.
And Twitter.
And Twitter at Ambu447. Excuse me, she's joined the Twitter world. Or you can follow your boy, the host of Off the Cuff, Adam Banks, at the Adam Banks on Twitter and Instagram. And I think I made that my Facebook handle too. I'll have to double check. But the Adam Banks.
You did.
Yeah, so Facebook, Twitter, and Insta, the Adam Banks, one handle. Follow Off the Cuff at Off the Cuff with Adam Banks. That is Amber Turner. I'm Off the Cuff. Okay, can we just start over? This is driving me stir crazy. That is Amber Turner. I'm Adam Banks, and this is Off the Cuff. We'll see you next Thursday.